The Chinese Communist Party has surrounded Taiwan with warships and is holding live-fire military exercises around the island. And this move is directed at U.S. support for Taiwan. In other news, the FBI is focusing on these Somali scam rings in Minnesota, and in a new update, even announced they're looking at American citizens for possible denaturalization and deportation. Also, with the midterms coming up, there's an effort to redo the census to ensure that non-citizens are not counted. This could have a huge impact on the number of House seats. I'll be talking about these topics and a lot more today. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and also leave a review if you've been enjoying the show. I'm the Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, and you're listening to Crossroads. The Chinese Communist Party has now surrounded Taiwan with warships. They're holding live-fire exercises all around the island, and they're saying this is because the United States is supporting Taiwan. Most importantly, this also happens as, well, the U.S. is, let's say, seizing oil shipments around Venezuela. Some are tying this together. Some are suggesting maybe something else. This also happens as the Chinese Communist Party is pushing its agenda to take Taiwan by force. I'll explain my take on it. But first, let me show you what the surface news is. Fox News says, China on Monday launched its largest military exercises ever around Taiwan. Now, this is important because even Trump said yesterday, he was asked about, hey, China has surrounded Taiwan. They're holding military exercises. Trump says, yeah, they hold military exercises around Taiwan all the time. He kind of didn't seem too concerned about it. He says he's friends with Xi, quote unquote, and Xi hasn't told him anything. In my opinion, there's quite a bit of miscalculation around the nature of Xi Jinping and of the Chinese Communist Party and their real intentions. They're individuals who will smile at your face and stab you in the back. But what's happening right now around Taiwan is this. They say aircraft, live fire drills as tensions spike following a record U.S. arms sale to Taipei, Taiwan. It says the drills known as Justice Mission 2025. You always call the just actions unjust and the unjust just. So they call this Justice Mission. It says it involves coordinated deployments of ground forces, Navy vessels, fighter jets, drones, and artillery across 7 maritime zones encircling Taiwan. It says China's Eastern Theater Command said the exercises include simulated strikes on land and sea targets and rehearsals to blockade Taiwan's main ports, a scenario analysts say would be central to any attempt to isolate or coerce the island. Notably, I was one of the main people who introduced that as the likely context of what a war would look like with Taiwan. I had referred to it as a castle siege strategy. The problem the CCP would face if they invaded Taiwan would be devastating. If you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan and about the, of course, landing of the American forces in Normandy, you would know that the Germans were heavily entrenched. They had heavy machine gun nests, and it was devastating. The anticipated deaths of Americans that day were significantly worse. It was regarded as a miracle that we won that battle with massively fewer casualties than even our leaders were prepared for. It was considered a miracle that we didn't lose more men that day. Part of it was because George Patton had misled the Germans about the landing elsewhere. The issue you have with Taiwan is that the options for landings are limited, let's say. It's a small island. Not only that, the north and the west of the island, very shallow waters. You can't really do that much. To the east side, you have deep waters. Even there, not very good for anybody trying to land there. And any landing would also be to heavily fortified in mountainous regions and also with very long-range strike capabilities. An attempted landing of Chinese forces on Taiwan would look like the Battle of Normandy times 100. You would have long-range strikes. You would have people being blown out of the water. You would have Chinese troops landing on the beaches, being decimated. You would have human wave attacks. It would be devastating to China. The American strategy for dealing with this, which at least the one we know of, would be what they call the hellscape strategy. It would be air, surface, ocean, and undersea ocean. drones, which would launch just hellscape attacks, as they directly call them, against Chinese forces. It would be decimating, absolutely decimating. And so for the Chinese Communist Party to attempt any attack like this, they would need to do something else first. In medieval times, if you wanted to take a castle city, you don't just attack it. If you do that, attacking a fortified position using ground troops, which is all they had back then, was absolutely devastating. So what did they do instead? They encircled it, they cut it off, and from there they launched catapult attacks and other things to whittle them away. China would do the same thing. Were they to take Taiwan, they would encircle it, they would cut it off, they'd sever the internet cables, which would isolate it economically. They would basically kill the economy, and then they would launch catapult attacks, i.e., that would be, of course, for example, missile strikes, land-based rocket attacks, and so on, in order to, let's say, soften up the island. They would not rush right into any kind of a ground invasion. The problem they have with that is that would give the United States time to respond, and notably Japan time to respond. Japan has said that it would respond, and so any attack on the Taiwanese mainland would be very difficult. What does that tell us? Well, they could do it as a kind of international policing incident. They could isolate economically Taiwan, they could sever the internet cables, and they could do this without having to, let's say, launch the actual hard attacks, rockets, missiles, anything of that sort. They could isolate it and then stir up trouble within. They could have protests on the streets. They could rile up students. They could get the United Front to cause trouble politically. They could have protests, riots, chaos, and from there make it appear, hey, the Taiwanese people want trade with China. They want engagement. They deny the United States. And all the little puppet show media would play the game and dance along with it, as they often do. That is what a war with Taiwan would look like. And then very likely you'd have a very, very rapid, quote-unquote, peacekeeping exercise to restore order, and that would be the guise under which the Chinese Communist Party would try to take Taiwan. Now, on this front, the Chinese Communist Party faces a few other problems. Namely, they cannot deal with the full brunt of the United States, and that ties into the deeper context of the other brewing wars we're facing, which I'll get into in a sec, but let me go into this a bit more. It says live fire exercises are scheduled to continue through Tuesday, with China designating large danger zones for artillery firing closer to Taiwan than in any previous round of drills. The scope of the operation has already disrupted civilian air and sea traffic, forcing airlines to reroute flights and Taiwan's aviation authority to plan alternative airspace corridors. Now, many people are wondering, how does this tie in with the other things we're watching right now? Russia, Iran, North Korea to an extent, most importantly Venezuela currently. What is the broader picture with this, frankly? I've mentioned previously, anybody who's watched Crossfits for a long time knows, for years, prior to even Russia's invasion of Ukraine, prior to the Hamas attacks against Israel, prior to Iran getting bombed, prior to this whole thing with Venezuela and all the whole drug boats and oil shipment seizures and the whole 9 yards, I told you all of this would happen. How did I know? It's because one of Xi Jinping's main advisors, a man named Qin Canrong, had put forth a war strategy for the Chinese Communist Party. This is not secret, it is public. They said that for China to invade Taiwan, they would need to do something else first. Namely, they would need to spark 3 wars prior to their 4th war. The thinking behind this is the US military is built to fight 2 wars simultaneously. He stated directly, China would need to get America involved in a war with Russia. Soon after this, Russia invaded Ukraine and America got pulled into it, not directly, but indirectly. And we've effectively drained a lot of our missile supplies, we've drained a lot of our armaments, and we don't have the capabilities to fully restock those without the use of Chinese resources, namely rare earth minerals, which they're now restricting. Soon after that, of course, Hamas attacked Israel. Most notably, what most people don't talk about is that just before that happened, the leaders of the Palestinian Authority met with the Chinese Communist Party, as did notably the Taliban right before the invasion of Kabul. Also notably on that front, who was meeting with the Chinese Communist Party and who is deemed the main supporter, the main enabler of the war between Russia and Ukraine? It is China. And so China is puppeteering at least 2 wars. Now, on the other front, of course, you have Iran. And Iran, of course, launching missile rocket attacks. The Chinese Communist Party is also their main backer. In fact, the United States recently seized Chinese shipments to rebuild Iran's ballistic missile supplies because they want to restart that. And then what else is happening right now with Venezuela? What is the Chinese interest in Venezuela? 2018, 2019, Russia and China bailed out Venezuela. They guarded Venezuela when Trump was threatening to invade the country. In fact, Russia sent 2 nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela and then told America if we dared to intervene, the results would be catastrophic. They threatened, indirectly, nuclear war against the United States, and Trump actually backed off at the time. The Chinese Communist Party has been puppeteering these wars from the get-go. And what do we have right now? The situation for China to invade Taiwan is not ideal. They don't have America fully embroiled in any of these wars, but they have us distracted. As things currently stand, it is this. Iran, what did they do? They're in a weakened state, but they just declared they're in full all-out war with the United States, Israel, and Western Europe. They just declared this. They're saying that basically they're in total war right now. Total war means they can use anything. They can't fully restock ballistic missiles, but what are they doing? They're building biological weapons. In fact, headlines just today and yesterday, in fact. Russia, what are they saying? Well, they're now saying that Zelensky in Ukraine tried blowing up the Russian palace to assassinate Putin, and they're now saying they're going to drag Zelensky's body through the streets. They're going to parade it, they say. Peace deals look like they're off, and it looks like Russia's going to go full in. The United States made a very smart move. We pulled out of that theater, and we're now saying, hey, Western Europe, pull your own weight. This is your battle, not ours. Meaning, while there's a war there, and while it could get worse, America's military is not distracted by it. Same thing, of course, with Iran. Israel is, of course, taking care of most of that. The United States may be just supporting with bombings at the very most. Trump is now saying that if Iran tries something, the results will be much worse than before. They don't have the capabilities to do much, although they are banging their drums. Same thing, for example, in Venezuela. What's happening in Venezuela? The CIA conducted drone strikes, blew up a port facility. We don't know the full details of this. All we know for sure is what Trump is saying, which is that it was something supporting the drug boats. They've begun carrying out land operations, air bombings, most notably, not actual troop combat. And that is now turning into something possibly bigger as well. The Chinese Communist Party is a very narrow window right now. And what is that narrow window? Although America is not embroiled in these wars, we kind of are in Venezuela. At least, a lot of the U.S. military's focus there, including a lot of the U.S. Navy. While we're not fully embroiled in these wars, it's costing us a lot of money, it's costing us armaments, and it's distracting us politically. They have a narrow window. And what is that narrow window? What does America lack? We lack rare earth minerals. We need those to make armaments. We need those to make ships. We need those to make chips. We need those for everything. We lack steel. We lack wartime production. We also lack medications, which a lot are made in China. We do not have the capability to wage a full-scale war without these. Trump right now is trying to rebuild them. The window for that is about 10 years. China has a window, in other words, of maybe 5 years, maybe less, where a war is plausible. It is a terrible circumstance for them to be in, not what they wanted, but it might be the best they ever get. If you're going to see a war with China, it will happen within the next couple years if they dare do it, because it would be devastating to them. But it may be the only and best chance they have if they want to do it, which is why it's so dangerous. My personal analysis on this. Now look, in other news, a lot of big stuff is going on. The FBI right now is hyper-focused on these Somali scam rings in Minnesota, and now Ohio, by the way. And in a new update announced even for American citizens, if you've been naturalized, you may be denaturalized and deported. And here's what they're saying. This is FBI Director Kash Patel. He's saying, case update, Minnesota fraud scheme. Kash says the FBI is aware of recent social media reports in Minnesota. I believe he's referring to something that effectively there have been claims that judges are letting these Somalis off the hook. There have been at least one big case with this, a couple others, where the jury has said, hey, the guy is guilty, and the judge says, well, case dismissed. You're free to go, mister, even though you've been convicted of multiple, millions of dollars in fraud. Cash says the FBI is aware of recent social media reports in Minnesota. He says, however, even before the public conversation escalated online, the FBI had surged personnel and investigative resources to Minnesota to dismantle large-scale fraud rings exploiting federal programs. What Cash is basically saying, and he goes into it a bit more. He's saying, yes, there are some problems, but it's not showing you the whole picture. The FBI is doing a lot to dismantle these rings. They are getting rid of them. And actually, the majority of these individuals who've been defrauding Americans, they've actually gone to prison, and many are being deported. And so while there are a couple cases of the opposite, the FBI actually has succeeded in getting a lot of these guys thrown in jail and thrown out of the country. He continues stating, fraud that steals from taxpayers and robs vulnerable children will remain a top FBI priority in Minnesota and nationwide. He said to date, the FBI dismantled a $250 million fraud scheme that stole federal food aid meant for vulnerable children during COVID. He said the investigation exposed sham vendors, shell companies, and large-scale money laundering tied to the Feeding Our Future network. He says the case led to 78 indictments and 57 convictions. And that's where it's important, right? People say they're all being let off the hook. Some are. Absolutely, some are. But he says 78 indictments and 57 convictions so far of those 78. And it's still going, by the way. They've actually gotten even more since then. Now he continues stating, these criminals didn't just engage in historic fraud, but tried to subvert justice as well. He goes over a few of the names prior to this and says their crimes, what they were doing, laundering money, scamming people, all kinds of stuff. One of these individuals, Abdimjab Mohammed Noor, and others, he says, were charged for attempting to bribe a juror with $120,000 in cash. They tried to bribe the jury. Makes you wonder about these judges, by the way. And of course, we don't know anything about that, but they were trying in one case and caught doing it to actually bribe somebody to let them go. He adds, quote, those responsible pleaded guilty and were sentenced, including a 10-year prison term and nearly $48 million in restitution in related cases. He says the FBI believes this is just the tip of a very large iceberg, which is what I've been saying as well. Why is it just the tip of a very large iceberg? Look, some reports are saying even what they've found, probably around $9 billion in fraud. Others claim it's up to like $15 billion in fraud just around these known scam rings. The amount of fraud the Somalis were committing is more than the entire GDP of the country of Somalia. And many of them were stealing this money and sending it back to Somalia. Keep that in mind. I've noted before, this is going to be broader than just the Somalis. You've been seeing these same types of fraud in every major migrant community in the United States, even among American citizens to an extent. This type of fraud is happening all across the United States. I would say to at least the same degree, state by state. In fact, they're now saying California is like makes this area look like child's play, like it's nothing, comparatively. They're saying New York is worse than that. Although I guess we'll find out if they ever investigate it or when they do, because I think they will. Cash is saying we will continue to follow the money and protect children, and this investigation very much remains ongoing. Why else is this important? New reports are saying it may have also tied in with voter fraud. What happened? Governor Tim Walz back in 2023 made it so that these illegal aliens and others individuals could get, interestingly, driver's licenses. And then they made it so that if you have a driver's license, you can register to vote. He did that right before he became the running mate of Kamala Harris, and of course they ran for president. Now, why else might that matter? We don't know if that was intended in any way, of course, to get illegal votes, but it is kind of suspicious, and people are looking into that now. We also know that in this area, the Somali community was allowed to do something else, which is you could have one individual basically collecting the votes and doing bundling and other things with basically unlimited numbers of people. James O'Keefe, with O'Keefe Media Group, and formerly with Project Veritas, had gotten undercover videos of Somalians admitting to doing this, where they were going around collecting illegal votes and voting illegally. In fact, even got hidden cameras in a car where a guy was admitting it and bragging about it. Now, how big of a problem is this actually? We don't actually know. Will they investigate it? We don't know also. They're not saying they will, but Cash is saying that what they found so far is the tip of a very large iceberg. Very likely this could turn into something very large. Very likely this could turn into nationwide investigations. And very likely this could go into additional investigations into all the different migrant communities and illegal alien communities and others tied in with international interests which have been robbing Americans, sending money overseas, and possibly doing other things, including stealing from food programs, stealing from student aid programs, stealing from COVID programs, stealing from programs for disabled children, and big issue happening here, especially with daycare centers and otherwise, stealing from Medicaid, defrauding Social Security, everything. And Americans have been paying for it, while individuals have also been taking steps to undermine the integrity of our entire system of elections, meaning they've been acting against the basis of our entire system of government, undermining the Constitution itself. And Cash is saying they may even deport these people, even if they've become American citizens. This is what he says on that. He says, furthermore, many are also being referred to immigration officials for possible further denaturalization and deportation proceedings where eligible. They're deporting some of them, or at least saying they might, even if they've been naturalized as American citizens. We'll see where it goes. This is still unfolding. And I would also add that the pressure you're seeing on local officials in this area, including, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of them. People are wondering how a member of Congress can make, just under $200,000 a year, and in the course of 4 years, somehow get $29 million. Good question. How does that add up? If you make less than $200,000 a year, and in 4 years you make, $29 million, mathematically, how is that possible? Luckily, a lot of these kids can't do math, but we may find out soon. Now look, on another topic, the midterm campaigns are coming up quick, and it turns out that President Donald Trump plans to campaign yet again, and he's going to be pushing his preferred candidates. This is White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles explaining this on the Mom View podcast.
He's going to have a fun next year, but we're going to put him on the campaign trail too. Typically, just a little bit of campaign speak, if I may.
Yeah.
Typically, in the midterms, it's not about who's sitting at the White House. It's you localize the election,
Right.
and you keep the federal officials out of it. We're actually going to turn that on its head.
Good.
And put him on the ballot, because so many of those low propensity voters are Trump voters.
Yes, they are.
And we saw a week ago Tuesday what happens when he's not on the ballot and not active. So I haven't quite broken it to him yet, but he's going to campaign like it's 2024 again.
Oh.
For all these people that he helps. He doesn't help everybody, but for those he does, he's a difference maker, and he's certainly a turnout machine.
Basically, they're saying that Donald Trump is going to get out there and he's going to be pushing his candidates yet again. And meaning, of course, Trump is going to be campaigning, he's going to be touring the country, he's going to be giving speeches. I don't know where the guy gets the energy for it, but he's going to be doing that. And what that also means is that the Trump system, the Trump narrative, the Trump kind of MAGA movement is going to be behind all the different members of Congress being pushed. You have a lot of Republicans who are not going to be running for re-election, actually a lot of Democrats too. On the Democrat side, you have the new kind of party coming up, the Democratic Socialists of America, launching kind of a color revolution inside the Democratic Party right now. They're taking it over from within. And their new narrative, it's all about economics. All about economics. You can't afford food, you can't afford to buy a house. They're talking about the affordability crisis. The Trump narrative is this. Basically, it was a lot worse under Biden. You're looking at inflation. It was over, I believe, 7% under Biden. A lot of that had to do with COVID, by the way. But Trump has it down pretty far, lower than the end of Biden administration. And he's saying basically they're working on it, but you're not going to feel it, the problem is, until throughout 2026, coming up soon. So this coming year, you'll start to see the changes, but very likely more towards the time of the midterms themselves. There's a race to show Americans tangibly that all these policies are making your life better. Democrats are going to be campaigning on it. Trump's going to be campaigning on it. The narrative is going to be affordability. Cheaper homes, lower cost of food, lower cost of pharmaceuticals, better tax returns, that thing. And if they can't do it, they might lose some votes. Now, it's also important for this reason, though. There's a big question for the future of the Republican Party. We see the Democrats in their future now. Very likely they're going to be pulled, unless they can break from it, pulled more closely or be taken over by Democratic Socialists of America. That is currently happening. Some are trying to resist it. That is currently happening. The Trump side, Trump came into the Republican Party as kind of a bull in a china shop, right? He came in very strong, really disrupted the party. If you remember back in 2016, they almost didn't let him run as their candidate. He has changed the party from within, changed the culture of it, changed the debates, changed the talking points. They're no longer the party of big business and war. Maybe they are again. But they're the party now more of this kind of American idea, right? And on that front, you're going to be watching something important, which is Trump pushing MAGA candidates. Trump pushing MAGA candidates, because there's a big question of what is the Republican Party after Trump? Now this is the end of his second term. We will find out. Now, speaking of politics, the last major political campaign saw President Donald Trump accused and investigated of crime after crime after crime, mostly using novel interpretations of laws, including, for example, changing the statute of limitations retroactively to bring charges against him, and then closing that after 1 year so no further charges could be brought after they brought charges against him. Interesting. But those investigations themselves are now under investigation. Not only that, they're also being referred to as a part of a broader criminal conspiracy of politicized lawfare. This is Just the News. It says Attorney General Pam Bondi told Just the News that she has asked prosecutors to investigate. In other words, Justice Department, hey, prosecutors, look into this, meaning if it comes to the head of the Justice Department, they're probably doing it, okay? Trump can't technically do it, Pam Bondi can, which means they're probably doing it. Prosecutors investigating the Obama era, the Obama-Biden era, they say, lawfare as an ongoing election meddling conspiracy that protected Democrats from criminal investigations and infringed the civil rights of Republicans like President Donald Trump and his supporters. It notes as well, recovering from eye surgery, Bondi made the revelations in written answers Sunday to questions submitted by Just the News, signaling she agrees with FBI Director Kash Patel, who earlier this year penned a memo predicting or predicating an investigation looking at the weaponization of intelligence of law enforcement powers dating to the Russia collusion case of as an ongoing conspiracy. In other words, they're looking at back in 2015, 2016, when the Democrats, when Obama was still president, launched criminal investigations into Trump, accused him, remember the intel agencies, everything going against Trump, accusing him of this whole Russia collusion hoax, appointed special counsels to potentially remove him from office, impeached him, spied on him, accused him. It turned out they knew it was fake. The whole thing was fake all along. That, of course, messed up the midterm elections, Trump's first term in office, and actually affected even the 2020 elections because the conspiracy was ongoing until then. Flip side of it, the Hunter Biden laptop was a big thing for 2020. The same individuals, including many former intel agents, came out and said the whole thing was a Russian hoax, meaning they used the Russia conspiracy collusion case as the excuse to say that whole thing was fake. It turned out that was real, but the Russia collusion thing was fake. And then used that to affect the 2020 election, among other things. and then proceeded to criminally target Trump, raided Mar-a-Lago, did other things as he was announcing his run for president yet again, used that to undermine his entire campaign. And of course, now the whole thing is blowing up, where they're now being accused of doing this for a reason, a criminal conspiracy, meaning basically they act in cahoots with each other with the intent of weaponizing the entire political and justice system against a candidate they did not want Americans to vote for, and also did not want the choice of the American people, part of our Constitution, to be accepted. Tried to use unlawful means to push him out of office, meaning, of course, a color revolution or a palace coup d'etat, and attempted to remove a sitting president from office, ousting him. Failed to do so, but tried to do it. Now, they say here, such an approach allows prosecutors to charge defendants with alleged crimes outside the statute of limitations because they were connected to an ongoing conspiracy, much like those cases brought against the mafia and drug cartels. What does it mean? Basically, good old-fashioned RICO, racketeering, right? If you're part of it in any way, you're part of it. Now, she said this, quote, "At my direction, our U.S. attorneys and federal agents are actively investigating instances of government weaponization nationwide." And she said this is a 10-year stain on the country, again, going back to 2015, committed by high-ranking officials against the American people. She says, under President Trump, we are fixing the damage and delivering justice. And it's that Bondi credited her department and the FBI for releasing an unprecedented number of documents to Congress about government weaponization, far more than prior administrations. And she said that evidence laid the predicate for a conspiracy case, meaning the evidence is there to justify criminal investigations. It says Bondi did not identify where prosecutors are conducting the investigation, but officials told Just the News a large part of the probe is being done in Florida, where President Donald Trump's home was raided in 2022, and notably where the judge was a lot more friendly to Trump. Now, she adds, quote, "The evidence illustrates that the FBI shielded political figures like Hunter Biden, as I mentioned, and Hillary Clinton, while pursuing conservatives for their beliefs, using legal process and operations that were excessive, instead of protecting Americans from public safety threats posed by an open border and violent crime." Meaning, in my interpretation here, they're not only looking at the political attacks against Donald Trump and people within the administration, they're also looking at the attacks on the American people themselves. Remember, MAGA, Make America Great Again, meaning a political campaign which won the popular vote, right? Meaning not most, but the majority of Americans did vote for, was deemed a radical movement, an extremist movement, allowing, as I've noted before, when the President of the United States, as Biden did, makes those kinds of statements, they have actual legal implications. If they call you a violent domestic extremist, if they call you even a domestic extremist, that means they can use, to an extent, certain extrajudicial powers against you. And we now know they were, in fact, doing that. Families protesting at school board meetings were being criminally investigated by the FBI. People praying outside of abortion clinics were being thrown in prison. Americans who went and peacefully protested to the Capitol, which many were that day, were thrown in solitary confinement on charges of no more than, trespassing, picketing, and parading. And, of course, were charged with novel interpretations of a law, disruption of an official proceeding, which was actually thrown up by the Supreme Court itself, meaning it was never a lawful interpretation. That's even just the tip of the iceberg, the weaponization of the justice system against the American people in order to frame a meta-narrative to target Donald Trump, which is the big narrative here. Pam Bondi says, all of this looks like a massive conspiracy against the American people and against Trump. And she said they went so far as to serve search warrants that their own department and law enforcement officials believed were excessive. She's talking about the raid on Mar-a-Lago, notably. Now, also with the midterms coming up, talking about the elections, there's an effort to redo the census to make sure that non-citizens and illegal aliens are not being counted. This is the most basic, unarguable way that the American election system and political system have been subverted by mass migration and mass illegal immigration. Why is that? When they do the US Census, they go around and ask people questions to get an idea of how many people in America, racial makeups, everything. They don't ask citizen or non-citizen. They don't ask legal or illegal. They ask everybody. And so if you brought in 20 million people, 30 million people, 40 million people, if you brought in mass migrants, even legal, all of those were counted on the census. And that means, based on population in individual areas, you get a certain number of House seats, meaning it can affect Congress and representation. It also determines how much money you get from the federal government and other things. And they're saying now that if they redo the census without counting that, Democrats could lose dozens of seats in the House of Representatives. And probably a lot of blue states will lose a lot of money. Now, they're going to redo this. There are a lot of legal challenges, and now the pushback is happening. Let me show you this. Epoch Times says, a public interest law firm is suing the U.S. Census Bureau to ensure that allegedly fraud procedures used in the 2020 census are not employed again in the 2030 count, the lawsuit claims. Now, on the point of 2030, Trump's trying to have it done before that. Trump wants to have a rapid additional census. It's being legally challenged. But he's arguing the previous census, by counting illegal aliens and non-citizens, basically rigged the political system and effectively altered political representation on illegal aliens and non-citizens. Now, it goes back to this. It says, in the lawsuit, America First Legal said its efforts are to ensure that the census counts only actual people. I think they mean Americans. I guess non-citizens are people too, right? They say, unlike in the 2020 account, when unlawful statistics sampling methods were used. It notes as well, the Census Bureau's methods distorted population counts, added fictitious persons, fair enough, right? Some were fake, to the count, diluted lawful representation, and produced defective results in direct violation of the U.S. Constitution, America First Legal stated. It says the firm, founded by Stephen Miller, senior advisor to President Donald Trump, filed its final brief earlier this week and expects a decision from a 3-judge panel in early 2026. We'll see what happens. Very likely this will not. We'll see if this affects the midterms. It might more affect, again, the coming presidential elections, which will happen slightly before that even, by the way. They say the ruling will carry constitutional consequences, the firm said. It also said errors in population counts meant state and local lawmakers are relying on inaccurate data, leaving them unable to make the right decisions for their constituents, according to the lawsuit. We will see that. So basically, this lawsuit will affect the midterms of the next president, 2030. This will not affect the coming presidential elections, let alone the coming midterm elections. Donald Trump wants to have a rapid redo of the census that's being blocked by various local judges. But that could actually have a huge impact on, especially the midterms, if they can do before then. The chances of that happening are still kind of slim, though. But we shall see. All right, everyone, that said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. And let's see here. First off, question from Tirio. You're saying CCP, China's Communist Party, might see us busy with other countries and seeing how we will respond. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Okay, so this is how, okay, you want to hear my actual calculation on what they're doing right now. Okay. The Chinese Communist Party, okay, what is the purpose of intel operations? Does anybody know what the purpose of intelligence operations is? It's to find out how your adversaries, and even your allies actually, to find out how they operate. So, when China violates the airspace of Taiwan, or Russia violates the airspace of Canada, or any country does that. Actually, a lot of countries do this, right? They fly into the airspace, they fly out. Why are they doing that? Do you know why? They're looking at response times. That is one method of intel operations. So they're saying, okay, how long does it take them to scuttle jets? How long does it take them to make the calls? How long does it take them to detect us? What is the modus operandi? What is the process of, okay, where does the call come from? Where are the sensors at? They do this to kind of, to kind of test where the vulnerabilities are and to figure out and map out the responses. How would you respond if I were to do this? How would you respond if I were to do that? And they map out, okay, if we did this, they would do this. If I did that, they would do that. This country did this one time, and this is how they responded to this. So they're looking at all of this intel, right? All countries for the most part also do this to their consulates and embassies. They collect local news reports, they try to figure out the culture, the laws, the constitutions, the loopholes, the cultural norms, the cultural offenses of every country. What time is rush hour? Something as basic as that. What time is rush hour? Because if you wanted to start a war, you do it during rush hour, right? Because it blocks emergency vehicles in military response because of traffic. Or if you launched an EMP attack, you'd want to do it while the roads were packed so that, because most cars, anything with even circuits, an EMP attack would fry cars as well. And so you'd have the roads gummed up with cars, meaning the ability to respond would be much more delayed. I'm just giving you examples of how intelligence operations work. They're finding out how you operate. Now, what does China know about how America operates? What would America's response be were China to violate an international agreement and take a region it claims by force? Well, what did Trump do when he was president the first time when China did this to Hong Kong? Does anybody remember? Hong Kong, of course, a little different from Taiwan. It was one country, two systems, but it was different, but not as different, right? Of course, China had some footprint in Hong Kong, but they had, of course, an international agreement with the United Kingdom. The CCP was not supposed to control Hong Kong. Taiwan is a little further from that. They have a completely separate political system, completely separate, basically everything. Unfortunately for them, because of good old Jimmy Carter and the United Nations, we stopped recognizing Taiwan as the official government of China. But we've always recognized Taiwan technically is part of China, diplomatically. Even though, again, very separate political system, they have their own president, they don't get along with each other, and of course, they might go to war with each other, right? Unfortunately, because of international designations, though, even by the United States, they're regarded as the same country. I don't see it that way, but politically, that is how it's viewed, right? So the analysis China would look at is, okay, what did we do to Hong Kong that we could do to Taiwan? Well, you invade and don't make it look like invasion. You make it look like an international security operation or an international policing operation or a health emergency or something like that. Well, there's a problem in Taiwan. We need to actually lock it down to make sure that this problem does not spread beyond its borders. Oh, there's a problem politically. This is now an international policing incident. We need to surround them with our Navy to make sure that we can bring justice and stability to this international policing incident. We need to shut down trade for some reason and cut off their cables. We can do this, right? Maybe we need to launch some domestic operations, protests. Very likely what you would have, Taiwan actually is very divided on the Chinese Communist Party as well, politically. Notably, the Kuomintang, the KMT, which used to be the anti-CCP party, has now become the pro-business with China party. You also have a lot of student organizations and third-party candidates and so on who were denied political representation in the recent elections. Technically, the party that's more pro-US is their equivalent of our Democratic Party, the DPP. And they were able to win, but had you had a consolidation of the Kuomintang and of course the more progressive far left parties, I guess you could call them, very likely, and also pro-China, by the way, they actually could have won. And so you have the conditions for a color revolution in Taiwan. You have the conditions for a color revolution. Now, there are many countries that could manipulate that. Taiwan is a little smarter than most of the countries on this. They're, I believe, one of the only countries, if not the only, that has banned the United Front. They're very much aware of CCP subversion, more so than America. They know this better than we do. They, of all countries on Earth, and I think I call them a country, of all countries on Earth, they're more aware of CCP subversion than anywhere. So it's a little harder for China to do that. But America's not as well versed on this, unfortunately. I wish they were. They're not. Other countries not as well versed on this. And China has a tried and true method, the taking of Hong Kong, to use against Taiwan, which basically they did it and they got a little tiny slap on the wrist. Oh, how dare you, that kind of thing. It was not much at all. It was a little pansy slap. It did nothing to them. Now, on that front, as Terrio notes, America is also divided right now. We're not embroiled in full-scale wars, but our Navy and a lot of our intel services are focused on Venezuela, Brazil, because Lula's working with, you're not hearing about it in the headlines, but Lula is working with Maduro, and Colombia. If Colombia and Brazil align themselves fully in a war with Maduro, you might have a very large war there. We could get embroiled in something larger. America very likely would try to avoid that, but we could get embroiled in something very large there. You also have the issue of cartel subversion of most of Latin America, including Mexico, including just about everywhere, frankly, most of the region. A lot of Chinese presence. The United Front is very powerful in Latin America, as is Iran and as is Russia. And as is Cuba, by the way. And their networks can very much try to stir up trouble. They can use these to try to draw America into a broader conflict. American military intelligence, American intelligence overall, is very much busy with Latin America. Very much busy with Latin America. And not only that, but if there are risks of, for example, oil shipments that need to be intercepted, weapons shipments need to be intercepted, we can't really move our military away from that region. Using our military, the Navy, to blockade effectively Venezuela, and probably it's going to have to be Brazil by extension to an extent, eventually, means we are, at least Navy-wise, heavily divided there. Now, why is that a problem? Our conflict with Russia is not a naval battle. To an extent, any conflict with Iran would be. So we would need to have some naval forces around Iran, meaning we would have to have very large South American naval focus to an extent, around Iran, that Horn of Africa type area, naval focus. And you would also have to have the Asia-Pacific region, very large region, which America's Navy is heavily focused on. So although we're not, troops, boots on the ground focused, right? We are Navy focused, and we are deeply divided in 3 regions currently. We're divided in 3 regions currently. Russia could turn us to a naval focus as well, were they to push into the Arctic, right? And so Russia, although they're not doing it so much currently, could get us divided into a 4th theater, at least Navy-wise, through the Arctic. And what is the political narrative right now? Iran just declared total war, okay? They just declared total war. They can't build the same ballistic missiles or nuclear weapons. They're now working on biological and chemical weapons. Anybody remember when Iran and Iraq were fighting each other for a long time, and we kind of let them because they didn't like each other? And then George Bush says, hey, how about we go and blow up, and destroy Iraq? And then Iran no longer had anybody to keep them in check, and we basically became the one they're focused on instead. Anybody remember that? Well, what was the whole thing with that, right? Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons. It was a very big problem. We actually anticipated during Desert Storm it would be a chemical weapons war. Any American troop being sent to Desert Storm had to have chemical weapons gear. It was very scary, actually, because, they had used chemical weapons even against civilians. Horrible videos you might remember of cars on the road, traffic frozen in time, filled with dead bodies because they dropped chemical weapons on civilians as they were trying to flee. Nightmare videos, actually, from that time. Iran is going to do the same thing now, right? And chemical weapons are no joke. You look at what they did to Israel, dropping all those bombs. You can intercept those, but intercepting chemical weapons or biological weapons and having that drop on your head, you're not going to be able to fully destroy it. That makes them a very dangerous adversary. Their declaration of total war is a regional threat, not against America, but because we're going to defend our ally in Israel, it could pull us into it. It very much could. So we will be pulled Navy-wise and Air Force-wise, and probably Space Force-wise, into possibly 4 theaters. Ground troops, U.S. Marines, I would assume are going to be hyper-focused in the Asia-Pacific, very likely around the Philippines, very likely possibly surrounding countries, very likely with Japan, and very likely with Korea, around, again, China. Now, as we're divided like this, China could say, you know what? The American military, although not fully engaged in a war, is divided enough, and they lack wartime production enough, where if they start losing ships, they can't replace them. If they can find a way to destroy our warships, not through China, they would not want to do that, at least not yet, but maybe through Iran, maybe through terrorist groups, and they could use those as the hand in the glove to do that. Maybe through terrorist attacks or, militia attacks, quote unquote, around Venezuela. They could do these types of things. Or if China could provide, if they don't do the proper naval blockades, or Russia could provide, and they're saying they have the ability to do it, hypersonic missiles to Venezuela or Brazil or Colombia, and China's getting around the need to ship it by saying they can use domestic factories to build it for them in their own country, they can start destroying our ships. If they destroy our ships, we can't really replace them, not in good time, because we lack wartime production. And if we start using our armaments too much, we risk not being able to support Ukraine, we risk not being able to support Israel, and we risk not being able to resupply ourselves enough to dissuade China from taking Taiwan. That is the calculation I'm looking at. If I were to break down the entire picture of what's happening right now, that would be my calculation on on the intel operations they're taking into account, on what would be a timely choice to invade Taiwan. And they would need to do this, that window of time would need to have these conflicts ongoing. They can't have peace between Russia and Ukraine. They can't have Maduro get overthrown in Venezuela. They can't have the government step in. They can't have the protests, mass protests right now in Iran, or Iran's missile systems get wiped out before this. They have a very small window of time, a very small window of time. And before America brings the factories back and builds the mines for rare earth minerals, they have a very small window of time if they want to do this. What does that tell me? They might do it. We'll see. It would be devastating to them if they did. But they might want that too, frankly. As crazy as it sounds, they might want that too. Because if you're having problems of protests and divisions and the lying flat movement of a bunch of lazy youth, what's the best way to deal with that? Or let's say government officials or military officials who are trying to overthrow you. What's the easiest way to kill all of them? You start a war and you throw them in the front lines. That's what you do. And they might be doing that. So we shall see. There are strategic uses for certain regimes to use wars to kill the unwanted populations. China did it before, notably with Korea. They were sending, for example, Buddhist monks they wanted to kill, forced to the front lines. Buddhist monks are forbidden to kill. They would use them to clear landmines by making them run at that in concertina wire to kill them. And so they were committing genocide effectively by using them as cannon fodder. China would do it again. The CCP would do it again. And that is my meta view, taking into account all the moving parts and estimating how this could turn out. That's my deep take on this. Jeremy Barker, you're saying, anytime you give people the ability to take from some to give to others, you will have all these problems. Yeah, you're talking about the Somalis, right? It is true, and it's the problem you're always going to have when you have a massive welfare state. I agree. This is more of a problem because loopholes were created and openings were created that allowed for massive fraud. Systems of proper oversight were done away with. I personally believe there's a lot of local corruption. I think you had a lot of local officials who were fully in cahoots with it. And not only that, what did you have? They're finding now, I'll get this, right? Even outside of the potential for direct election fraud, they're now finding some of these nonprofits, organizations that were stealing money through various programs like the daycare centers and stuff. Some of these programs were also making political donations. So, if you create the conditions for fraud, you eliminate the oversight to prevent fraud from happening, you block investigations, which they were doing, into fraud. Meaning you allow it, you encourage it, you guard it, and then you get donations from the money stolen from fraud. Are you involved? And what is your incentive then in stopping it if your hold on political power is dependent on it? You tell me. Americans don't think like this, but this is the normal practice of the criminal underworld in many countries, including with the cartels throughout almost all of Latin America, including with terrorist organizations throughout just about every country with a terrorist problem, from Afghanistan to Somalia. And what are you seeing with all these countries? They're doing the exact same thing here. They're doing the exact same thing here because that is what they did in their countries to get friendly politicians in place to buy people off, to turn a blind eye, to allow them to commit crimes. And there's an exchange. You let me commit crime, and I will use the money I steal to help you maintain power. Right? You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Full-on mafia tactics. And this is what they're doing in these areas. This is what the Somali community has been doing, as we've already seen on the available evidence. I'm not saying this based on an assumption. And what I believe you will see as investigations like this continue into criminal organizations, fraud organizations, migrant communities, and potential violations of laws to scam American systems in every single state across the entire country. Now, will they do anything about it? The FBI is very much focused on this. Okay, let me tell you, with the FBI, their biggest challenge right now, the image of the organization has been really badly maligned, especially among Republicans, actually, because of the Trump-Russia hoax. Remember, in Trump's first term in office, a lot of the FBI leadership was against him. James Comey was in charge, right, during his first term. The FBI was acting against Trump during his first term in office. The FBI was acting against Trump during Biden's term in office. And against MAGA and Trump supporters during a lot of that time. And so among Trump supporters, a lot of them really lost faith in the institution. It has really important uses, actually. Getting rid of it, demonizing it, is not a good thing. As someone who's been investigating Chinese subversion for almost 2 decades, I've been investigating this stuff. If we got rid of the FBI, it would be bad for us. And that's even just the tip of the iceberg. But a lot of Americans have lost faith in it. How do you restore faith in an institution? Transparency and observed necessary action. They're struggling with this, but they're trying. Transparency, they did the Epstein files. Transparency, they're releasing information on Russia, the Russiagate thing. Transparency, they're trying to get things out there. They're talking about what they're doing. They're telling us a lot of things. They're more transparent than they've probably ever been, actually. And action. Americans want to see people they believe who weaponized the system, who abused it, who've been robbing them, who've been cheating them, who've been doing all these things. They want to see them go to jail. And until Americans see these people go to jail, they're not going to fully believe that something's being done. And they also want to see a cleaning house. They want to see all the people in the agencies, all the people in these organizations who they believed wronged them and were part of a weaponization of justice be held accountable. Anything short of that risks the integrity of the organization. And so it's a very difficult place to be in. I believe that Kash is doing a good job with this, but it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. But on that point of Pam Bondi talking about the weaponization of justice, look, she's with the Justice Department. If there's been weaponization of justice, where did it happen through? The Justice Department. She's criticizing her own institution by doing that. Meaning, when she says they're talking about investigations of weaponization of justice, she's talking about investigating her own branch or organization she's in charge of. She's talking about an internal investigation and recommendations of prosecutions. And so you might see that. I do think that will be necessary, and I think they understand the necessity of it because the faith in the system needs to be restored. Americans need to bring back their faith in the integrity of our system. And I do think they're working on it. Sometimes when you've been injured, you want to have the problem fixed right away. Sometimes a wound takes a while to heal, and they're struggling with it. Trump's been in office almost a year now, but still less than a year. And they're moving pretty quick, but you're not going to see something like that get fixed overnight. And I think that's the message they're trying to send to the American people. But they are working on it, so we shall see. All right, everyone, that said, what do you all think? Is it moving fast enough for you? Do you want it to move faster? Do you think I'm missing something? Let me know in the chat. And that said, please don't forget to like and share this video. It does help us a lot. Let me know what you think of this episode as well. And join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time for more great discussions. I will see you all then. And until then, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.